When an 85-year-old war veteran was punched across the face in plain view of a diner full of silent witnesses, no one imagined that 10 minutes later, his son, a Special Forces commander, would arrive and turn the entire town on its heels without raising a single weapon. That man was Walter Jennings, the kind of man who didn't need a welcome sign or a spotlight, because he was the landmark. Every Saturday at noon, he sat on the same wooden bench outside Cora's diner like it was reserved by the Constitution. Tan windbreaker zipped just enough to nod at the season, black cane between his knees like a quiet warning. Army cap pulled low over silver hair that had seen more wars than most folks had seen winters. He didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Walter's silence carried more weight than most folks' Sunday sermons, and that's exactly why when the bikers showed up, nobody expected trouble until they crossed a line that would make the whole town remember who Walter really was. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. Cora's diner wasn't just a place to eat. It was a clock tower of town life, ticking loud with gossip, grudges, and grits. Folks came for the hash browns and stayed for the familiarity. It smelled like bacon and forgiveness. Every creaky stool at the counter had a story, and every regular had their place. Walter's place wasn't inside, it was outside, on that bench, sipping black coffee like it held the answers to questions nobody wanted to ask. He'd been sitting there longer than the gum under table 6. People in Somerville didn't bother him when he watched the street. Kids were told to lower their voices when they passed. Even stray dogs trotted quieter on his end of the sidewalk. He wasn't a man you approached casually. He was the last page in a book you weren't ready to finish. But that day, the quiet was broken by engines that sounded like they were angry just to be running. The Harrow bikers rolled up loud and proud, all leather and ego, their jackets stitched with patches that looked more like warnings than emblems. They parked crooked, kicked gravel like it owed them money, and strutted like they had something to prove. They didn't go in the diner. They didn't have to. They had spotted Walter alone, still unmoved. And that, apparently, was reason enough to poke the bear. Their leader, a sunburnt slab of man named Briggs, stomped toward the bench with that slow confidence that only ever comes from ignorance. His vest bore a faded Confederate flag and a name patch that probably hadn't been earned, just sewn. Briggs stopped in front of Walter like he expected him to flinch. "Look at this old relic," he sneered, loud enough for the street to hear. "Ain't you out past your prime, Grandpa?" Walter didn't even raise an eyebrow, just looked at him the way you look at a fly before deciding if it's worth swatting. "You got a problem, son?" he asked, voice calm like the ocean before a storm. That made Briggs laugh, the kind of laugh that needs backup to feel loud. "Nah, no problem. Just don't see why an old black vet's taking up space where real men eat." Now that silenced the sidewalk. A man across the street paused mid-pump. A woman inside the diner froze with a pot of coffee mid-pour. Walter stood up, slow, careful, not because he was weak, but because he'd earned the right to take his time. "I fought for this country," he said, cane in one hand, pride in the other, "long before you figured out how to ride a bike." Briggs's smirk shrank, but his pride wouldn't let him walk. "And what'd that get you? A bench and a paper cup?" Walter locked eyes. "I got enough. Now get gone." But cowards never leave clean. Briggs's face twisted into a grin too wide to be sober. "You talk real brave for someone one push from a nursing home, Walter." Didn't move, didn't blink. "And you talk loud for someone who's never heard gunfire up close." That was it. Briggs swung. Fast, stupid, full of the kind of rage that only grows in men who've never been taught how to lose. The punch landed hard, cracking across Walter's jaw. His cane dropped, body following like a folding chair in a thunderstorm. His head hit the curb, blood started pooling by the concrete, and the town, it stood still. Nobody moved. Nobody helped. Not even the ones with their hands shaking under tables or phones half raised. Because sometimes, when something truly wrong happens, people don't act shocked. They act like they don't know what to do. But 10 minutes later, they'd remember exactly who Walter Jennings was and who raised the man coming next. The SUV pulled into the lot like it didn't care what came before it. Matte black, government plates, windows tinted darker than judgment. It didn't screech or swerve. It rolled in quiet, smooth, deliberate. A funeral procession had more drama. The engine cut off, and for a second, the world stayed in pause, like the story hadn't decided what kind of chapter this would be. Then the door opened, and out stepped Major Travis Jennings. He didn't slam the door. He didn't rush. He moved like a man who'd already seen the worst of men and knew how little noise was required to dismantle them. 6'1" in regulation boots, still in uniform from a classified training out of Fort Moore. His gloves clipped to his belt, not worn. He didn't need them. He had something sharper. Presence. His posture didn't say, "I'm here to fight." It said, "I decide when this ends." And the moment his boots touched the pavement, the temperature changed. Even the air seemed to tighten its belt. Travis saw the blood first. Not the crowd, not the cameras, not the puffed-up biker playing alpha over a fallen elder. Just his father. On the ground, cane out of reach, lips bloodied, breath shallow. Travis didn't yell, didn't call for help. He walked to him. Straight line, no theatrics. And when he got there, he didn't check the crowd for who was watching. He dropped to one knee like he was kneeling at a grave he hadn't prepared for. "Dated," he said, barely above a whisper, like he was trying to coax life back into the man who used to carry him on his shoulders. Walter didn't speak right away, but he moved, just barely, enough for Travis to release a breath he didn't know he was holding. He didn't touch him yet, just stayed low, eyes scanning. One medic, one soldier, one son. And right now, all three were the same. Briggs shifted like he had something to say, but Travis hadn't even looked at him, not once. His focus was still on Walter, brushing loose gravel away from his father's cheek, trying to assess if that blood was shallow or deep. "He hit you?" Travis asked, still not raising his voice. Walter gave a faint nod. Not because he was weak, but because words were costly, the kind of slow that says, "Now we begin." He turned his head, finally meeting Briggs's eyes. And what Briggs saw wasn't anger. It was certainty, the kind that makes fists pointless. "Did you hit him?" Travis asked flatly. Briggs straightened, chest puffed, like a rooster trying to look bigger. "He mouthed off," Briggs replied, shrugging like the answer should have been enough. "I reminded him who's in charge." Travis took a single step forward. Not close enough to threaten, just close enough to be undeniable. "Touch him again," he said, calm as a courthouse clock, "and you won't get a second reminder." And right on cue, a second SUV pulled in. Same black coat, same lack of flair. 4 doors opened in near silence. 4 men stepped out, not dressed for show, not armed for chaos, but built like the end of negotiations. They moved like a unit even as they spread, earpieces in, vests tight, eyes scanning not with fear, but with memory. These weren't bouncers. These were war walkers. The smallest among them, Staff Sergeant Nolan, stopped by the entrance. "Major?" he asked, eyes only on Travis. Travis gave a single nod. "Secure the perimeter." No questions, no explanations. Nolan moved. The rest followed. One stood near the gas station, another near the alley, another near the street. They didn't say a word to the crowd. They didn't have to. Their silence said, "This isn't for you, but you're about to witness something worth remembering." Briggs tried to laugh, tried to puff his chest again like it wasn't slowly deflating with every uniform that filled the scene. "You think you scare me?" he muttered, but his voice cracked like a cheap windshield. "You're already scared," Travis replied. "You just don't know what to do with it yet." The town didn't cheer. This wasn't a movie. But the energy shifted. People leaned in, not just physically, morally. A waitress behind the diner counter wiped her hands on her rag but didn't return to her table. The man at the pump hadn't resumed filling his tank. A teenage girl behind a phone camera stopped shaking. Because the moment wasn't about confrontation anymore, it was about clarity. And in the middle of that silence stood Walter's blood. A single dark line running down the edge of the curb like punctuation at the end of an ugly sentence. The asphalt held his body, not just like pavement, but like memory. Because this wasn't the first time Walter Jennings bled on American soil. It just might be the first time a town watched and had to decide what that blood meant. Travis didn't need to hit back. He didn't need a weapon. He had something heavier, legacy, and now even the ground seemed to speak. Because it had felt his footsteps before, and it remembered. Creates mirror moments for viewers to self-reflect. ChatGPT. The street had gone still, but not in the way silence usually creeps up. This silence didn't sneak. It settled like fog, thick and slow, wrapping around the diner, the gas station, the crowd that had forgotten how to breathe. Phones were up, yes, but not moving. The same hands that once swiped for weather updates and coupons now trembled slightly, unsure if they should still be filming or just bear witness. The ones who didn't pull their phones out just stared, eyes wide, mouths set, hearts in their throats like they were all trying not to choke on their own inaction. That punch had landed minutes ago, but the echo hadn't stopped. It kept bouncing off brick walls and window glass, hitting ears in new ways each time. Nobody said a word. Not the waitress wiping already clean menus, not the old man who always argued about the bill, not even the kid at the register who just learned what cowardice in silence feels like. Walter moved. Not much, a twitch, a breath, a slow curl of fingers around air that didn't want to hold him. Travis saw it first. He leaned down, voice low. "Dad? I'm here." Walter blinked once. His left eye was swollen shut, but the right one fought to open, cloudy and defiant. "I know," he rasped. His voice cracked like parchment in a church basement drawer. And still, somehow it held command. Travis placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Help's coming." Walter gave a slow nod, not because he was agreeing, but because he knew it didn't matter. Help had already arrived. Not in the ambulance, that hadn't shown up yet, but in the presence, the witnessing. His lips parted again. "He hit me," he said, as if saying it made it real, as if his own blood needed confirmation. "I know," Travis replied. "You stayed down." Walter chuckled, then winced. "Can't say I stayed down by choice." As Travis opened the first aid kit and began cleaning the cut along Walter's cheek, the old man's mind wandered. That wasn't the first time he bled for standing somewhere someone didn't think he belonged. It wasn't the first time his silence had been misread as weakness. He remembered another bench, another man yelling, another uniform. But back then, the boots weren't supportive, they were swinging. Back then, blood came with paperwork that got misplaced, and justice came with a price tag too steep to afford. He remembered lying in a muddy trench in Nam, pulling shrapnel out of his thigh with shaking fingers, wondering if he'd ever walk again. He remembered Alabama, 1962, water hoses and dogs. He remembered the look in his mother's eyes when the bus came home, but not her son. That punch Briggs threw? That was just today's chapter in a book Walter never wanted to write, but had been forced to edit his whole life. "He didn't like the color of my skin," Walter muttered, eyes still on the crowd. "But really, he didn't like that I stood up." Travis paused, the antiseptic wipe still in hand. "That's always been the trigger," Walter continued, his voice thin but laced with clarity. "They say it's about language or politics or respect, but it's always been the standing." Travis nodded slowly. "They'd rather a man like you disappear quietly than be seen drinking coffee like you earned that peace," Walter exhaled. "I didn't fight to be feared, son. I fought so I could sit." The sentence hung in the air like a hymn. plain, unadorned, and sacred. The soldiers didn't flinch. They didn't shuffle or speak or shift their weight. They stood like monuments, one at the alley's edge, another near the pump, another by the diner's door. They didn't do anything to escalate, but their very presence shifted the rules of engagement. They weren't just bodyguards. They were witnesses of a different kind, symbols of a country still wrestling with its own reflection. Even Briggs, for all his fake bravado, hadn't moved. Not since they arrived. He leaned on his bike now like it was a prop, like it could explain away the weight in his shoulders, but nobody was listening to him anymore. The street was still, reverent, the way people get quiet around graves, or baptisms, or when truth walks into the room wearing boots and a name badge. Every town has its moment. Some get theirs under Friday night lights, some get theirs in protest marches. Somerville got theirs on a Saturday over coffee with a cane on the ground and a legacy bleeding into the curb. This wasn't just about an old man getting punched. This wasn't about a biker with a temper. This was about everyone who watched, everyone who didn't move, everyone who now stood in that echo chamber asking themselves what they were doing while a man who earned the right to peace got dropped in broad daylight. This moment didn't scream. It whispered, loud and long and unskippable. Because once you see something like that, you don't unsee it. And if you're lucky, if you're listening, that silence teaches you something louder than any siren ever could. Walter didn't ask for help getting to his feet. He made getting up a sermon. Travis offered an arm, but the old man waved it off with that slow, stubborn motion that said, "I've gotten off worse ground before." His hand reached for the cane, still lying where it fell, and the moment his fingers closed around it, something shifted again. He pressed his palm against the wood like he was touching a flag, then pushed aside. 1 inch. Another. He rose, back bent but unbroken, face bruised but eyes sharp. And there he stood. Blood still fresh, breath still catching, but upright. He didn't flinch, didn't waver, didn't even blink when he looked across the lot and locked eyes with the man who put him down. In that moment, it was clear the only man standing tall wasn't the one in boots and a patch. It was the one in a windbreaker with 85 years behind him and a town watching every second like it was a history lesson they'd skipped. Travis didn't raise his voice. He didn't step forward with fists or threats. He spoke where he stood, loud enough for the whole lot to hear, quiet enough to feel like truth. "You didn't just hit a man," he said to Briggs. "You swung at a legacy." Briggs straightened slightly, like the words landed heavier than expected. "You swung at a father who raised sons who served the country that kept ignoring men like him. You swung at a generation that took bullets overseas and blame back home. You swung at every man who built something out of nothing, who took pride where they weren't allowed to take space." Travis paused, letting the silence stretch. "And you missed. Not because your aim was off, but because you thought power was noise." Walter didn't move. He didn't need to. His stillness said more than any retort. Briggs tried to recover. His shoulders rolled like he was gearing up for some comeback, but it didn't land. He glanced sideways at his crew, maybe hoping for backup, maybe hoping someone would still laugh at a well-timed slur, but the laughter didn't come. One guy, beard, sunglasses, boots laced too tight, took a step back. Another scratched his arm, like the vest had suddenly grown heavier. A third one shifted his weight, eyes locked on the ground. Briggs looked around and realized too late. Loyalty evaporates in public shame. When no one wants to stand behind you, that leather starts to feel like skin that doesn't fit anymore. Then came the quiet rebellion. One of the younger bikers, couldn't have been more than 19, stepped away from the group. He didn't make a scene. He didn't throw a punch or shout a slogan. He just reached up, unclipped his vest, folded it once, then again, like he was packing up a piece of himself. He didn't renounce the brotherhood. He renounced the silence. His walk toward the edge of the lot was slow. Head down, and still it made more noise than Briggs had all morning, and when he passed Walter, he didn't speak, but he nodded. A real one. The kind of nod you give to a man who just reminded you what it looks like to survive something you've never had the courage to face. Briggs tried to play it off. "You got your moment," he muttered, voice brittle, cracking at the edges. Walter looked at him, dead center. "You think this is about a moment?" he asked. "Son, I've lived through decades of men like you, loud in packs, quiet alone. You didn't regret hitting me, you regretted being seen doing it." Briggs opened his mouth like he had something to say, then closed it again. There was nowhere left to hide. Walter leaned on his cane, tilted his head just enough to let the crowd know he was watching them now. "You ever wonder why no one stepped in?" he continued, his voice still steady. "It's not because they agreed with you. It's because they're scared of what you represent. And what I represent threatens that." He pointed the cane gently at the ground between them, but make no mistake. You don't represent strength. You represent delay. Delay in decency. Delay in courage. Delay in finally standing for something that doesn't come with a warning label. The town began to breathe again, like someone had finally let the pressure valve go. A few people started moving, slowly, unsure, like deer testing the safety of a clearing after gunfire. The sheriff's nephew, still holding his phone near the diner's register, lowered it, his eyes glued to Walter like he was watching a man rewrite history in real time. A mother who'd been hiding behind her stroller took a step forward. Someone coughed, not because they needed to, but because they didn't know what else to do. Cora, still behind the blinds, wiped a tear she probably didn't even know was there. And all of them, whether they realized it or not, had shifted. No cheers, no applause, just a town that had been peeled open, made to look at itself. Because sometimes courage doesn't shout. It shakes its head, and sometimes the loudest correction comes from a man who doesn't bother raising his voice, because the silence has finally learned how to listen. The ambulance pulled up slow, like it didn't want to interrupt something sacred. No sirens, just the crunch of gravel under tires and the soft hiss of brakes that came to rest near the edge of the diner lot. Two paramedics stepped out with practiced calm, one carrying a first aid bag, the other unfolding the stretcher like they'd done it 100 times. But neither of them spoke right away. They saw the blood, the bruises, the cane. They also saw the crowd, the uniforms, the history stitched into the air. One of them knelt beside Walter, voice low, professional. "Sir, we'd like to take you in just to be safe." Walter didn't answer at first. He stared down at the pavement like it was asking him to leave something behind. Finally, he nodded. Once, but held up a hand. "I'll go," he said, slow and cracked like worn leather. "But let me say this first." Travis crouched beside him again, silent, letting his father find the words. "You don't get to choose what kind of fight comes to your door," Walter said, his gaze aimed somewhere past the diner windows, past the crowd, maybe into time itself. "But you do get to choose how you carry it. Some men carry it in fists, some carry it in silence, and some carry it so their sons won't have to." He turned his head to Travis. "I didn't raise you to be angry. I raised you to be ready. And you were. Not with violence, with presence. That means more than you think." Travis swallowed hard, his voice low. "I learned that from watching you sit here every Saturday. You never had to prove who you were. You just were." Walter smiled. "That's the whole game, son. Sit long enough and they'll try to move you. Stand when it counts and they'll try to silence you. But live right, and even if they knock you down, they'll never forget the sound of you getting back up." The crowd shifted again as the sheriff's cruiser pulled up. Sheriff Langley stepped out, slow, hat in hand. He wasn't in a hurry. This wasn't a ticket call. It was a reckoning. He walked over, pausing a few feet away. "Walter," he said, clearing his throat, "I just came from Briggs' house. He's agreed to a public apology, town square. 3 days from now." Walter raised an eyebrow, one side of his busted lip twitching with disbelief. "Voluntary?" Langley gave a half shrug. "Didn't take much convincing. Think he saw himself in a few of those videos. Didn't like the man staring back." Walter nodded slowly, not because he was impressed, but because he understood. "Embarrassment makes folks honest. For a minute. Let's see if he can hold it longer than that." Langley tipped his hat. "Either way, it's a start." Walter did, but his face didn't soften either. Because a start doesn't mean a change. It just means someone finally noticed the fire was burning. As the paramedics checked his vitals and prepped the stretcher, Walter looked at the crowd again. His voice was quieter now, but it didn't need to be loud. "That punch didn't break me," he said. "The watching did." The people didn't flinch, but a few looked down. He wasn't angry. Not exactly. He was tired. Not from age, but from repetition. "I've lived through dogs and hoses and—" "Move along, sir. I've lived through medals they gave me with one hand and doubt they handed me with the other. But today, I watched people I've shared meals with, bought gas from, waved at from this very bench, stand there while a man laid me out like I was trash to be swept up." He paused, breathing deep. "That's the part I won't forget." Travis stood now, arms crossed, not in defiance but in solidarity. Walter reached for his cane again, tapping it once on the ground. "Maybe we can't erase what happened," he said, "but we can make sure it echoes right. Not with revenge, with remembering. You want to fix a town? Start by making it honest." He scanned the faces. "Don't call yourself a neighbor if you can't be a witness. Don't call yourself peaceful if you only mean quiet." The silence that followed wasn't defensive. It was heavy, sure, but receptive, like the town was trying to hold what had been handed to them. Walter finally gestured toward the stretcher. The paramedics helped him gently. No rush, no commands, just care. Before they loaded him in, he turned his head one last time toward the sidewalk where so many had frozen earlier. "You can't sit silent and call yourself good," he said. "Not anymore. Not after today." Then he leaned back, eyes half closed, breathing steady. The doors shut, without a slam. The wheels rolled forward without fanfare, and Somerville stood watching. Not stunned this time, not afraid. Just different. A town slowly shifting, one truth at a time. By 9 the next morning, Walter Jennings was back on his bench. Bruised, stitched, taped, but back. The coffee cup between his hands trembled slightly, but not from weakness, from gravity. The kind that comes from sitting in the same place with more history under your skin than most folks read in a lifetime. He wore the same windbreaker, though the zipper was slower to pull. His cane rested neatly against the wood beside him. That bench didn't look like much. But today, it was the strongest structure in town. People passed slower. Some nodded. Some couldn't quite meet his eyes. The diner's chime rang behind him, same as always. It was like time tried to carry on, but even the breeze knew it needed to tread lightly around Walter Jennings today. A little boy stopped on the sidewalk, no older than 8. His hand gripped his mother's fingers, but his feet froze in place. His eyes didn't move from Walter. The mother paused, tried to guide him along, but the boy shook his head and pulled away, not out of defiance, but something deeper. He took 2 hesitant steps forward, looked at the man with the bandaged lip and the quiet stare, and spoke with a voice that carried more weight than anyone expected. "Thank you, sir." No prompt, no coaching, just truth from the gut of a child. Walter looked down at him, expression unreadable at first, then nodded once, solemn and slow. "You're welcome, young man." The boy turned back to his mom, who was already blinking harder than usual, and they moved on. That thank you lingered longer than footsteps ever could. Travis stood across the street outside the hardware store, arms crossed, watching the old man he'd watched for years. After a moment, he crossed over, boots quiet against the pavement, and sat next to his father without a word. Walter didn't look up. "Didn't have to come back so soon," he muttered. Travis shrugged. Didn't feel right being anywhere else. They sat like that for a while, listening to the town hum again. Walter took a sip of coffee, winced slightly, then chuckled. "You know what I kept thinking about last night?" Travis glanced over. "What's that?" Walter kept his eyes on the street. "That line, the invisible one, the one people pretend doesn't exist until it's been crossed." Travis nodded slowly. "The one between right and easy?" Walter exhaled. "Between looking at someone and seeing their worth? Or just seeing someone in your way?" They didn't need to say more. They both knew that line had been drawn yesterday in blood, and now it wouldn't be forgotten. Sheriff Langley approached quietly, hat in hand again, voice softer than usual. "Morning, Walter." "Major?" They nodded. He shifted awkwardly, then said, "Briggs has agreed to the apology. Town Square, Wednesday noon." Walter raised an eyebrow, same as he had yesterday. "Voluntary still?" Langley nodded. "Says he wants to say something face to face." Walter took another sip, slower this time. "Good," he said. "Let him feel the silence I felt." The sheriff swallowed hard. "Whole town's expected to show." Walter didn't flinch. "They better." Langley stood there a moment longer, then gave a nod and walked away, the weight of his badge feeling heavier than it did 2 days ago. Walter looked down at his cane, fingers tracing the notches near the handle. "Some lines," he said, "you don't even know are there till you see the blood on 'em. They're not painted, not marked. They're just real. And when someone steps over 'em, you find out fast who you are and who they are too." Travis stayed quiet, letting his father's words land like slow rain on dry ground. Walter looked at him, eyes steadier now. "Stood up by staying down. And the town finally stood with you." Travis blinked, letting that sink in. "I didn't plan any of that." Walter smiled. "You didn't have to. Sometimes the moment finds you. All you have to do is not run from it." The coffee was nearly gone. The breeze carried that crisp morning smell of fall leaves and fresh understanding. Walter looked back toward the boy and his mother, now halfway down the block. "And kid's going to remember what he saw," he said. "Not the punch. The standing." Travis nodded. "We all will." Walter leaned back on the bench, same posture as before, as if nothing had changed. Except everything had. The town had seen, the town had stayed, and now the town had to decide who it wanted to be. Across the diner lot, 2 high schoolers passed by. One nodded at Walter. The other didn't speak, but he didn't look away either, and that was something. The legacy wasn't clean, it wasn't easy, but it was there, solid. Like the man who kept showing up every Saturday, not to be noticed, but to remind the world what still deserved respect. Some things you defend with fists. Others you defend just by being there. Walter Jennings was still there. And now, Somerville knew better than to look away. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.